Millionaire CEO can't believe it when she sees her daughter pulling the poor maid's hair. Just before we start, drop a flag emoji that represents your country. The marble floors of Sterling Industries' executive wing reflected the afternoon sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows as Victoria Sterling, 34, adjusted her Hermès blazer and checked her Patek Philippe watch. Another successful board meeting behind her, another million-dollar deal secured. Her empire, built from nothing after her father's death 15 years ago, now spanned 3 continents. But success came with a price she was about to discover. "Mommy!" 7-year-old Emma's voice echoed through the hallway as she burst from the private playroom adjacent to Victoria's corner office. The little girl's designer dress was wrinkled, her usually perfect blonde curls disheveled, and there was something wild in her blue eyes that made Victoria pause mid-stride. "Emma, sweetheart, what's wrong?" Victoria knelt down, her maternal instincts immediately activated despite her exhaustion from the long day. "Did you finish your homework with Miss Patricia?" "She's stupid!" Emma shrieked, her small hands clenched into fists. "I told her I wanted juice and she said I had to wait because she was cleaning Daddy's old office." Victoria's heart clenched at the mention of her late husband, Michael. Even 3 years after the accident, Emma still called his unused office Daddy's office, though Victoria had long since converted it into a storage room. The grief counselor said it was normal, that children processed loss differently, but hearing it still cut deep. "Emma, we don't call people stupid," Victoria said gently, reaching out to smooth her daughter's hair. "Mrs. Rodriguez works very hard to keep our offices clean. She has her own schedule to follow." "I don't care." Emma's voice reached a pitch that made several passing employees turn their heads. "She's just the cleaning lady. She should do what I say." Before Victoria could respond, Emma spun around and marched back toward the playroom. Victoria followed, her designer heels clicking against the marble with increasing urgency. Something in her daughter's tone, something cold and entitled, sent warning bells ringing in her mind. The sight that greeted her in the playroom doorway would haunt Victoria for weeks to come. 62-year-old Maria Rodriguez, who had cleaned Sterling Industries' offices faithfully for 8 years, was on her hands and knees picking up scattered building blocks. Her salt and pepper hair had fallen from its neat bun, and tears streamed down her weathered cheeks. Emma stood over her, small hands tangled in the older woman's hair, pulling with deliberate cruelty. "You're dirty and poor and stupid," Emma screamed, yanking harder. "My mommy owns everything and you're nothing. Emma Sterling." Victoria's voice cut through the air like a whip. She lunged forward, carefully but firmly separating her daughter from the terrified woman. "Let go this instant." Emma released Maria's hair with a satisfied smirk that chilled Victoria to her bones. This wasn't a tantrum. This wasn't childhood frustration. This was calculated cruelty from a 7-year-old who somehow understood the power dynamics at play and was wielding them like a weapon. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I am so terribly sorry," Victoria said, helping the older woman to her feet. Maria's hands trembled as she adjusted her cleaning uniform, and Victoria noticed the red marks on her scalp where Emma had pulled her hair. "Are you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" "No, Senora," Maria whispered, her accent thick with emotion. "Es okay. I understand children get frustrated sometimes." But Victoria could see the shame in Maria's eyes, the humiliation of being attacked by a child while the child's mother watched. This wasn't about childhood frustration. This was about something far more serious, something that had been growing in Emma without Victoria noticing. "No, it's not okay," Victoria said firmly, placing a protective hand on Maria's shoulder. "This behavior is completely unacceptable, and I want you to know that it doesn't reflect the values of this company or this family." Emma crossed her arms defiantly. "She should have gotten my juice faster." "Udi." The casualness of her daughter's response hit Victoria like a physical blow. Where had this come from? How had her precious little girl, the daughter she'd raised to be kind and compassionate, developed such a cruel streak? And more importantly, how had Victoria missed the warning signs? "Emma, go to my office immediately," Victoria commanded. her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. "Sit in the chair by my desk and do not move until I get there." "But Mommy!" "Now!" Emma's lower lip jutted out, but something in her mother's tone must have warned her that she'd pushed too far. She stalked out of the playroom, leaving Victoria alone with Maria, who was quietly collecting the scattered toys with shaking hands. "Mrs. Rodriguez, please stop," Victoria said gently. "Let me help you." "No need, Senora. I finish my work." Victoria knelt down despite her expensive suit, gathering wooden blocks alongside the woman her daughter had just humiliated. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths about privilege, power, and the lessons children learn from watching the adults around them. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Victoria began carefully, "does Emma... Has this happened before?" Maria's hesitation was answer enough. The older woman's eyes filled with fresh tears, and she whispered, "Sometimes she says things, mean things about my clothes, my accent. I thought it was just children being children." Victoria's heart shattered. Her daughter, the little girl she'd worked 16-hour days to provide for, had been tormenting an employee who couldn't fight back without risking her job. How many times had this happened while Victoria was in meetings, making deals, building her empire and missing what was happening right under her nose? "I'm going to fix this," Victoria promised, though she had no idea how. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I want you to know that you have my complete support. Emma will apologize, and she will face consequences for her actions." Maria nodded silently, but Victoria could see the doubt in her weathered features. After all, what consequences could really touch a 7-year-old millionaire heiress? What punishment could make someone like Emma understand the pain she'd inflicted on someone like Maria? As Victoria walked back toward her office, her mind raced with questions that had no easy answers. How did you teach humility to a child who had never known want? How did you instill empathy in someone who had never experienced powerlessness? And most importantly, how had Victoria failed so completely as a mother without even realizing it? The sound of her heels against the marble seemed to echo with each step, a rhythmic reminder of the wealth and privilege that separated her family from people like Maria Rodriguez. Emma was waiting in her office, swinging her legs from the oversized leather chair, looking more bored than remorseful. "Emma," Victoria began, closing the office door behind her, "we need to have a very serious conversation about what just happened." "I was just mad," Emma shrugged. "She was being slow." "Being slow is not a reason to hurt someone. She's just the cleaning lady, Mummy. Why are you so upset?" "Dis." The casual dismissal in her daughter's voice made Victoria's blood run cold. This wasn't just a behavior problem. This was a fundamental failure of character, and Victoria realized with growing horror that she had no idea where to begin fixing it. Outside her office windows, the city stretched out below them. Millions of people living their lives, struggling with problems far more serious than anything Emma had ever faced. Somewhere out there, Victoria realized, were the answers she desperately needed. But first, she had to figure out how to reach a 7-year-old who seemed to have learned all the wrong lessons about power and privilege. The intercom on her desk buzzed softly. "Mrs. Sterling?" Her assistant's voice came through the speaker. "Mrs. Rodriguez would like to speak with you privately before she leaves for the day. She says it's important." Victoria's pulse quickened. What could Maria possibly want to say that couldn't wait until morning? And why did something in her assistant's tone suggest that whatever Maria had to share would change everything? Don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell. This story is just getting started, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Maria Rodriguez stood in the doorway of Victoria's office, her cleaning cart beside her, and her coat already buttoned, despite the October warmth outside. Her weathered hands clutched a small piece of paper, and her dark eyes held a mixture of determination and fear that made Victoria immediately stand from her desk. "Mrs. Rodriguez, please come in," Victoria said, gesturing toward the seating area away from her desk. Emma had been sent home with the nanny 20 minutes earlier, still protesting about the unfairness of missing her evening cartoons as punishment. "What can I do for you?" "Senora Sterling," Maria began, her accent heavier when she was emotional. "I need to tell you something. About your daughter, but also about—" She paused, looking around the opulent office with its original artwork and panoramic city views. "About why I think she acts this way." Victoria's stomach tightened. "Please, sit down, take your time." Maria perched on the edge of the leather sofa as if she were afraid she might stain it, despite having cleaned this very furniture countless times. She unfolded the piece of paper in her hands. A business card, Victoria realized. "I have a grandson," Maria said quietly. "His name is David Chen Rodriguez. He is 32 years old, and he teaches children who have behavioral problems at the community center in East Side." Victoria nodded, though she wasn't sure where this was leading. East Side was one of the city's most challenging neighborhoods, where Sterling Industries had recently funded a youth development program. It was good PR, but Victoria had to admit she'd never actually visited the facility. "David, he has experience with children from wealthy families who—" Maria struggled for the words. "Who forget that other people have feelings, who think money makes them better than others." The words stung because Victoria recognized the truth in them. Emma's behavior today wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern Maria had been witnessing for months, maybe longer. "Your grandson helps with these situations?" Victoria asked carefully. "See, but more than that." Maria's voice grew stronger, more confident. "David, he was not always a teacher, he was." She paused, as if the next words were difficult to say. "He was once like your Emma. Rich father, everything handed to him. But life, it teaches hard lessons sometimes." Victoria leaned forward, intrigued despite herself. "What happened?" "His father lost everything when David was 10 years old. Stocks, bad investments, pride that cost him his family's fortune. David went from private schools and country clubs to food stamps and charity. He learned what it feels like to be the one people look down on." The story hit closer to home than Victoria wanted to admit. Her own father had built Sterling Industries from nothing, and she'd inherited his drive, but also his fear of returning to poverty. Maybe that fear had influenced how she'd raised Emma, surrounding her daughter with luxury as a shield against the hardships Victoria remembered from her own childhood. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Victoria said slowly, "are you suggesting that your grandson could help Emma?" "I am suggesting," Maria said, her voice gaining strength, "that maybe Emma needs to learn from someone who understands both sides, someone who knows what it feels like to have everything and to have nothing." Victoria studied the older woman's face, seeing past the cleaning uniform and the weathered hands to the intelligence and wisdom in her dark eyes. This wasn't just an employee making a suggestion. This was a grandmother who had watched a troubled child for months and had finally found the courage to speak up. "Tell me more about David," Victoria requested. Maria's face softened with obvious pride. After his family lost their money, David was angry. So angry. He got in fights at school, disrespected teachers, thought everyone was looking down on him. But a counselor, she saw past his anger. She helped him understand that his pain didn't give him the right to hurt others. And now he works with children like Emma. But also children like he was. Children who are angry about losing things. Children who are angry about never having things. He helps them find compassion for each other. Victoria walked to her window, looking out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the early evening darkness. Below, thousands of people were heading home from work, each carrying their own struggles, their own stories. How many of them had children who were learning the wrong lessons about their place in the world? "Mrs. Rodriguez," she said finally, "I need to ask you something honestly. How long has Emma been treating you this way?" The silence stretched long enough that Victoria turned around. Maria was staring at her hands, and when she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Since the beginning of summer, it got worse. But pequeña things, they started maybe a year ago." "A year?" Victoria felt sick. Emma had been tormenting this woman for a year, and Victoria had been completely oblivious, lost in board meetings and business deals, while her daughter developed into someone she barely recognized. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Victoria asked, then immediately regretted the question when she saw Maria flinch. "Senora, you are very important, very busy, and Emma, she is your daughter. I am just." Maria gestured at her uniform. "I am just the cleaning lady." The echo of Emma's earlier words hit Victoria like a slap. Her daughter had learned to categorize people by their economic value, and Maria had internalized that same hierarchy. Victoria had created an environment where both the victim and the perpetrator believed that wealth determined worth. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Victoria said firmly, "you are not just anything. You are an employee I value, a person I respect, and apparently someone with more insight into my daughter's problems than I've had myself." Maria looked up, surprise flickering across her features. "I would like to meet your grandson," Victoria continued. "If he's willing, I'd like to discuss the possibility of him working with Emma. But I need you to understand something. If we do this, things are going to change around here. Emma will apologize to you properly, and she will learn to treat you and everyone else who works here with respect." "Senora, you don't need to." "Yes, I do." Victoria returned to the sofa, sitting across from Maria. "I've failed as a mother and as an employer. I've created an environment where my daughter thinks she can abuse people who can't fight back, and I've been too distracted by business success to notice. That ends now." Maria's eyes filled with tears, but this time they seemed to be tears of relief rather than pain. "David, he will want to meet Emma first," Maria said. "He always says you cannot help a child who doesn't want to be helped. But maybe if Emma understands that her actions have consequences, real consequences that affect real people, she will want to change." Victoria nodded, though privately she wondered if Emma was capable of that kind of self-reflection. 7-year-olds weren't known for their introspective abilities, and Emma had never faced real consequences for anything in her life. "There's something else," Maria continued, her voice growing hesitant again. "David, he will not accept payment for this kind of work. He says that when you try to buy solutions to problems caused by money, you miss the point." "I can respect that," Victoria said, though the idea of not being able to write a check to fix this problem was deeply unsettling. Money had always been her solution to obstacles. How did you approach a problem you couldn't purchase your way out of? "But," Maria added with a small smile, "he will accept donations to the community center. There are many children there who need help. Not just rich children who need to learn humility, but poor children who need to learn hope." Victoria found herself smiling for the first time since the incident in the playroom. "I think we can arrange something like that." As Maria gathered her coat and prepared to leave, she turned back to Victoria with one final observation. "Senora, Emma is not a bad child. She is a confused child. She has been taught that having more makes you worth more, but she has never learned that giving more makes you better more." The grammatical error didn't diminish the power of the statement. As Victoria watched Maria walk away, pushing her cleaning cart toward the service elevator she'd used every day for 8 years, she realized that this woman, who Emma had dismissed as just the cleaning lady, had just offered them both a lifeline. But first, Victoria had to figure out how to explain to a 7-year-old millionaire heiress that she was about to learn some lessons that money couldn't buy, and somehow she suspected that conversation would be more challenging than any business negotiation she'd ever faced. The business card Maria had left behind sat on Victoria's coffee table. David C. Rodriguez, Youth Counselor, Eastside Community Center. Simple black text on white cardstock, no fancy logos or embossed lettering. It looked so ordinary compared to the heavy cardstock business cards Victoria was used to exchanging with CEOs and board members. But as she picked up the card, Victoria realized it might represent the most important business relationship she'd ever formed. The question was whether David Rodriguez would be willing to take on a client who had everything money could buy, but who was desperately lacking in something far more valuable. "Your comments mean the world to me," Let me know what you think about Victoria's journey so far and whether you believe Emma can really change. The East Side Community Centre occupied a converted warehouse that had seen better decades. Victoria's Mercedes looked out of place, parked between a rusted pickup truck and a city bus stop, but she'd insisted on driving herself to this meeting. Emma sat beside her in the passenger seat, still sulking 3 days after the incident with Maria Rodriguez. "Why do I have to meet some stupid teacher?" Emma complained for the dozenth time since leaving their penthouse that morning. "I already said sorry to the cleaning lady." Victoria's jaw tightened. Emma's apology had been a mumbled few words delivered while staring at her shoes, followed immediately by a request for ice cream. It had been less remorse than performance, and everyone in the room had known it. "Because, sweetheart, we need to understand why you thought it was okay to hurt Mrs. Rodriguez," Victoria explained again. "And this teacher specializes in helping children work through their feelings." "I don't have feelings to work through," Emma muttered. "I was just mad." As they walked toward the community center's entrance, Victoria noticed Emma's reaction to their surroundings. Her daughter stayed close to her side, eyes wide as she took in the neighborhood's chipped paint, barred windows, and the group of teenagers playing basketball on a court where the hoops had no nets. "Mommy, why is everything so old here?" Emma whispered. "Not everyone lives the same way we do," Victoria replied carefully. "Some people have less money, but that doesn't make them worth less as people." Emma seemed to consider this, but Victoria could practically see the confusion on her daughter's face. In Emma's limited experience, worth and wealth were synonymous. Breaking that connection would be David Rodriguez's challenge if he agreed to take them on. The community center's interior was clean but worn, with motivational posters covering walls that needed fresh paint. Children of various ages clustered in different areas, some doing homework at mismatched tables, others engaged in art projects with supplies that had clearly been donated and reused multiple times. "Mrs. Sterling?" A voice behind them made Victoria turn. David Rodriguez was not what she had expected. At 32, he was tall and lean, with intelligent dark eyes and an easy smile that immediately put her at ease. He wore jeans and a simple button-down shirt, but there was something in his posture and the way he spoke that suggested education and confidence. This was not someone who had been broken by his family's financial ruin. This was someone who had been refined by it. "Mr. Rodriguez, thank you for agreeing to meet with us," Victoria said, shaking his hand. "This is my daughter Emma." David knelt down to Emma's level, a gesture that immediately caught Victoria's attention. Most adults bent slightly when talking to Emma, but David made himself physically smaller, meeting her on her terms. "Hi, Emma," he said simply. "I've heard you had a rough day at your mom's office." Emma crossed her arms defensively. "I don't want to talk about it." "That's okay," David replied, standing back up. "How about we start with something else? Have you ever seen kids from different kinds of families all playing together?" Before Emma could answer, David gestured toward the main activity area, where children were engaged in various games. Victoria noticed immediately what he was pointing out. Kids in designer sneakers, playing alongside others in second-hand clothes, teenagers with expensive phones sitting next to peers whose backpacks were held together with duct tape. "They all look different," Emma observed. "They are different," David agreed. "Different families, different amounts of money, different problems, but watch what happens when they play together." As if choreographed, a boy in a clearly expensive soccer uniform passed a ball to a girl wearing a patched hoodie. She dribbled skillfully around 2 other players before scoring a goal, and the expensive uniform boy cheered louder than anyone else. "The rich kid is happy that the poor kid scored?" Emma asked, genuine curiosity replacing her earlier defensiveness. "The teammate is happy that his teammate scored," David corrected gently. "When you're playing on the same team, the only thing that matters is helping each other succeed." Victoria watched this exchange with growing admiration. David wasn't lecturing Emma about right and wrong. He was showing her a different way of seeing the world. But she also noticed something else. Several of the older kids were watching their conversation with interest, and she had the distinct impression that David was putting on a show for multiple audiences. "Mr. Rodriguez?" Victoria interjected. "Could we speak privately for a moment?" David nodded, then turned to Emma. "There's an art project happening over there if you'd like to join in. Sarah is really good at helping new kids get started." He indicated a teenager with paint-stained fingers who was already walking over with a welcoming smile. Emma looked uncertain, glancing between her mother and the unfamiliar girl. "It's okay," David encouraged. "Sarah, this is Emma. She's never done a community art project before." "Cool," Sarah said with genuine enthusiasm. "We're making a mural about what home means to different people. Want to help paint some of the houses?" As Emma was led away, still hesitant but curious, Victoria found herself alone with David for the first time. "She's not what I expected," he said without preamble. "What did you expect? More anger, more defiance. Most kids who hurt people are either really angry about something or they've been hurt themselves and they're passing it on." David studied Emma, who was now listening intently as Sarah explained the mural project. "Emma seems more confused than angry." Victoria felt a mix of relief and concern. "Is that better or worse?" "Different," David said thoughtfully. "Confusion can be redirected more easily than anger, but it also suggests that Emma genuinely doesn't understand why her behavior was wrong. She's not being malicious. She's operating from a worldview that makes her actions seem logical, which is that some people matter more than others, and the way you determine who matters is by looking at who has more money." The blunt assessment stung because Victoria recognized its accuracy. "How do I change that?" David was quiet for a long moment, watching Emma tentatively dip a brush into blue paint under Sarah's encouraging guidance. "Mrs. Sterling, can I ask you something personal?" Victoria nodded, though she braced herself for whatever was coming. "When you were Emma's age, how did you determine who mattered?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Victoria's childhood had been spent watching her father work 18-hour days to build his business, missing school plays and birthday parties because someone has to provide for this family. She'd learned early that love was demonstrated through financial security, that worth was measured in quarterly earnings, and that the people who mattered were the ones who could help you climb higher. "I see," David said softly, apparently reading her expression. "So Emma isn't really the problem, she's the symptom. I beg your pardon." "She's learned these values from somewhere, Mrs. Sterling. 7-year-olds don't develop complex theories about social hierarchy on their own. They absorb what they see around them." Victoria felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Are you suggesting this is my fault?" "I'm suggesting," David said calmly, "that if we want Emma to change, we might need to examine what she's learning from the adults in her life." The words hung in the air between them, and Victoria realized she was at a crossroads. She could take offense and walk away, protecting her ego and returning to a world where money could solve most problems. Or she could acknowledge that David was right and begin the much harder work of examining her own values. "What would you recommend?" she asked finally. David smiled, and Victoria caught a glimpse of the boy he must have been before his family's fortune disappeared. "I'd recommend that Emma spend time here, not as a charity case being helped, but as a community member helping others. I'd recommend that she learn what it feels like to be valued for her contributions rather than her inheritance." "And what would you recommend for me?" "The same thing," David said simply. "When was the last time you did something for someone who couldn't possibly pay you back?" Victoria opened her mouth to protest. Sterling Industries donated millions to charity every year, but David continued before she could speak. "I don't mean writing checks, Mrs. Sterling. I mean actually doing something, getting your hands dirty, solving problems that don't have bottom-line benefits, helping someone who will never be able to help you in return." Across the room, Emma was painting careful blue strokes on a house, while Sarah cheered her efforts. For the first time in days, Emma was smiling naturally, not performing happiness for adult approval. "Would you be willing to work with Emma?" Victoria asked. "I'd be willing to work with both of you," David replied. but only if you're both committed to the process. This isn't something you can outsource, Mrs. Sterling. If Emma is going to learn different values, she needs to see you living them. Victoria looked around the community centre with new eyes, seeing past the worn furniture and donated supplies to the genuine connections being formed between children from vastly different backgrounds. This place offered something that all of her money couldn't buy, the opportunity to be valuable for reasons that had nothing to do with bank account balances. "When do we start?" she asked. David's answering smile suggested that he'd been hoping she would say exactly that. But as Victoria watched Emma carefully painting her contribution to the community mural, she couldn't shake the feeling that this journey would require her to confront truths about herself that she'd spent years avoiding. And something told her that David Rodriguez understood exactly what those truths were, even if she wasn't ready to face them yet. The question was whether a woman who had built her identity around financial success could learn to find worth in something money couldn't measure, and whether a 7-year-old who had never known want could develop empathy for those who had never known plenty. What Victoria didn't know was that David's own story held secrets that would challenge everything she thought she knew about loss, redemption, and the real cost of success. 3 weeks into Emma's sessions at the community centre, Victoria found herself doing something she hadn't done in 15 years, sitting on a paint-splattered floor, helping children create Halloween decorations. Her designer jeans would never recover, but the children's laughter made those concerns seem trivial. "Mrs. V, you're getting more paint on yourself than on the pumpkin," giggled Marcus, a boy whose infectious smile masked the fact that he'd been living in his car with his mother for the past month. "Maybe that's my artistic style," Victoria replied, deliberately adding another orange handprint to her shirt, which sent Marcus into delighted giggles. Across the room, Emma was working with Sarah and 2 other teenagers on a haunted house facade. The transformation in Victoria's daughter over the past 3 weeks had been remarkable. The entitled, cruel child who had tormented Maria Rodriguez was being overshadowed by someone kinder, more curious about the world beyond her privileged bubble. "Mom, look!" Emma called out, holding up a carefully painted ghost. "Sarah taught me how to make the eyes look really spooky." "That's terrifying," Victoria called back with exaggerated fear. David appeared beside her, crouching down to examine Marcus's pumpkin masterpiece. Not bad for someone who claimed she'd never touched craft paint before. "I'm discovering I have hidden talents," Victoria replied, then lowered her voice. "How is she really doing? Emma, I mean." David settled onto the floor beside her. "She's processing a lot. Yesterday she asked me why some kids don't have enough food when other kids throw away half their lunch. What did you tell her?" "I told her that was a very good question, and that maybe she could help figure out some solutions." Maria Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, her shift at Sterling Industries finished for the day. She came to the community centre twice a week now, officially to help with reading programs, but Victoria suspected she mainly wanted to observe Emma's progress. "Abuela Maria!" Marcus shouted, launching himself into the older woman's arms with paint-covered hands. Victoria watched the interaction with growing understanding. Maria wasn't just David's grandmother. She was a surrogate grandmother to dozens of children in this neighborhood, offering stability and love to kids whose family situations were chaotic. "How are my artists doing today?" Maria asked, surveying the creative chaos. "Mrs. V is learning to paint," Marcus announced proudly. "She's not very good yet, but she's trying really hard." As Emma bustled off to help David carry decorations to storage, he approached Victoria with an expression that suggested their conversation was about to take a more serious turn. "Mrs. Sterling, can we talk privately for a minute?" Victoria felt her stomach tighten. "Is something wrong?" "No, Emma's doing great. This is about something else." David glanced around the room. "I need to tell you something about my family's history and why I really agreed to work with Emma." David was quiet for a long moment, watching Emma and Sarah arrange decorations. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. My father's name was Robert Chen. He was a business partner of your father's back in the early days of Sterling Industries. The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. She remembered Robert Chen. Her father had spoken about him during her childhood, usually with bitterness. The partnership had ended badly, but her father had never shared the details. David, what exactly happened between our fathers? Your father accused mine of embezzling money from their joint ventures. The accusation destroyed my father's reputation overnight. No one would do business with him. Investors pulled out, and within 6 months, our family went from millionaires to bankruptcy. Victoria felt the blood drain from her face. Was it true? The embezzlement? David's jaw tightened. No. My father was naive and trusting, but he never stole a penny. The real embezzlement was being done by your father's accountant, Thomas Westbrook. But by the time the truth came out, my father had already lost everything. The name Thomas Westbrook sent a chill through Victoria's memory. She remembered him vaguely from her childhood, a thin, nervous man who had managed Sterling Industries books until his sudden departure when Victoria was 12. Are you telling me that my father knew the truth and let your family suffer anyway? I'm telling you that when evidence surfaced proving Thomas Westbrook was the actual thief, your father could have cleared my father's name publicly. Instead, he stayed silent and used the scandal to acquire my father's business connections and contracts at bargain prices. Victoria leaned against the wall, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. The empire she'd inherited, how much of it had been constructed on the destruction of David's family? Why are you telling me this now? Because Emma isn't the only one who needs to understand that actions have consequences, David replied quietly. Your father's choices shaped who you became, and through you, who Emma became. The ruthless business practices, the idea that winning justifies any cost. Emma learned those values because they're embedded in Sterling Industries' DNA. Why did you agree to work with Emma if you knew all this? David was quiet for so long that Victoria wondered if he would answer. Across the room, Emma was showing Marcus how to make tissue paper flowers. Her patience with the younger child, a stark contrast to the cruel girl who had tormented Maria Rodriguez. Because Emma isn't responsible for what our fathers did to each other. And because I've spent 22 years learning that healing broken things is more satisfying than staying angry about them. But you must hate us. My family cost your family everything. I hate what happened, David admitted. I hate that my father died believing he was a failure and a thief. But carrying hatred for your father wasn't hurting him. He's been dead for 15 years. It was only hurting me. So you forgive us. I forgive Emma because she's a child who can still learn better. I forgive you because you're trying to do better. David paused. But Victoria, working with Emma isn't enough anymore. If you really want to break the cycle, you need to do more than teach your daughter to be kind to cleaning ladies. What do you mean? I mean that Sterling Industries still benefits from the reputation damage your father caused mine. I mean that there are other families who suffered because your father's success was built on their failures. What do you want me to do? I want you to use the resources your father's choices gave you to repair some of the damage. I want Sterling Industries to become the kind of company that builds people up instead of tearing them down. Victoria looked around the community center with new eyes. All of this, David's work with troubled children, Maria's volunteer hours, this was what justice looked like when it focused on healing rather than punishment. The community center needs funding, better facilities, more programs. It does. But writing a check isn't enough anymore, Victoria. Emma needs to see you involved, personally committed to fixing problems that don't benefit you financially. Across the room, Emma was teaching Marcus delicate painting techniques, her small hands guiding his with gentle patience. The transformation in her daughter was real, but fragile. There's something else, David said, his voice dropping lower. Something I haven't told you about why your father really stayed silent about Thomas Westbrook's crimes. Victoria's stomach clenched. What? Thomas wasn't just stealing money. He was stealing it to pay gambling debts to dangerous people. Your father didn't expose him because Thomas threatened to reveal that Sterling Industries' early growth came from money laundering for those same people. The revelation hit Victoria like a tsunami. Not only had her father allowed an innocent man to be destroyed, but he'd done it to cover up his own criminal activities. "Victoria," David said gently, "I'm not telling you this to destroy you. I'm telling you because secrets like this have a way of coming out eventually, and when they do, they hurt innocent people. Help me fix it," Victoria said suddenly. "All of it. I don't know how, but help me figure out how to make amends." David studied her face, evaluating her sincerity. "It won't be easy. It will mean acknowledging publicly that your father wasn't the heroic entrepreneur everyone believes. It will mean potentially losing money and relationships built on the old foundation. And if I don't do it," David glanced toward Emma, "if you don't do it, then everything Emma is learning here is temporary. She'll go back to her old world and become exactly what you were afraid she was becoming. Where do we start?" David's smile was the first genuinely warm expression she'd seen from him since learning their history. "We start by teaching Emma that the most important skill she can learn is how to say, 'I'm sorry,' and mean it. Then we figure out who else deserves to hear those words from the Sterling family." Emma appeared at Victoria's elbow, paint-stained and beaming. "Mum, can we come back tomorrow? Sarah said they're starting a reading program, and I want to help teach the little kids." Victoria looked down at her daughter, seeing the little girl who was learning what it felt like to be valued for her contributions rather than her inheritance. "Yes, sweetheart, I think we'll be spending a lot more time here. And hit that subscribe button if you're as invested in this family's transformation as I am, because what happens next will change everything." Victoria Sterling stood in her father's old study for the first time in 5 years, surrounded by mahogany furniture that had always represented success and power. Now, knowing what she knew about the foundation of that success, the room felt like a mausoleum dedicated to carefully hidden crimes. It had been 2 weeks since David's revelation about their father's history, and Victoria had spent sleepless nights wrestling with a decision that would determine not just her future, but Emma's as well. Tonight, she'd finally found the courage to search through her father's personal papers. Emma was asleep upstairs, exhausted from another day at the community center. The transformation in her daughter continued to amaze Victoria. The little girl who had once pulled Maria Rodriguez's hair was now someone who patiently helped struggling readers. The locked filing cabinet in her father's study had always been off-limits during Victoria's childhood. "Business papers," he'd always said. Now, using the key she'd found in his desk drawer, Victoria finally understood why those papers had been so carefully guarded. The first folder contained contracts and correspondence related to the Chen partnership, documents that painted a very different picture than the one Victoria had grown up believing. Her father's handwriting filled the margins of letters from Robert Chen, revealing calculating manipulation. "Project Cleanup," her father had written next to one proposal. "Let RC take the heat for TW's mistakes. Acquire assets at discount once reputation destroyed." Victoria felt sick reading her father's cold planning of Robert Chen's destruction. This wasn't a partnership gone wrong. This was deliberate sacrifice of an innocent man to protect her father's crimes and expand his empire. The second folder was worse. Financial records showed payments to consulting firms that were clearly shell companies connected to criminal enterprises. Her father hadn't just stayed silent about money laundering, he'd actively participated in it. But it was the third folder that made Victoria sink into her father's chair with her head in her hands. Insurance policies, life insurance policies on Robert Chen, taken out shortly before the scandal that destroyed him. Her father had literally bet on Robert's death, collecting a substantial payout when stress and shame led to a fatal heart attack just 2 years after his business collapsed. Victoria ran to the bathroom and vomited, her body rejecting the knowledge that her comfortable life had been built not just on lies, but on calculated cruelty that had contributed to an innocent man's death. When she returned, she found Emma standing in the doorway in her nightgown. "Mommy, why are you awake? I heard you getting sick." Victoria quickly closed the folders, but not before Emma caught sight of the scattered papers. What are all those papers about? Victoria held her daughter close, feeling the weight of generational responsibility. What she said in the next few minutes would shape Emma's understanding of justice and accountability. "They're papers about some mistakes your grandfather made when he was building his business, mistakes that hurt other people." Emma processed this with the seriousness she'd developed since beginning her community work. "Like how I hurt Mrs. Rodriguez." "Yes, sweetheart, like that, but much bigger mistakes that hurt more people." "Did Grandpa ever say sorry?" The innocence of the question broke Victoria's heart. Emma had learned that hurting people required apologies and efforts to make amends. "No, baby, Grandpa never said sorry. He kept the mistake secret and let other people get blamed for things they didn't do." Emma's forehead wrinkled. "But that's lying. And lying makes everything worse." "You're absolutely right. And sometimes, when people make big mistakes and don't fix them, their children have to figure out how to make things right. Is that what we're going to do? Make Grandpa's mistakes right?" Victoria looked at Emma's trusting face, seeing David's influence in her daughter's assumption that making amends was obviously the correct choice. "Yes, that's exactly what we're going to do. Will it be hard? Very hard. We might lose money, and some people might be angry with us." Emma considered this with gravity beyond her years. "David says that doing the right thing is usually harder than doing the selfish thing, but it makes you feel better about yourself when you look in the mirror." David is very smart. After tucking Emma back into bed, Victoria returned to the study and the damning evidence. She spent the rest of the night making copies of the most damaging documents, preparing for conversations that would fundamentally change everything. By dawn, she had developed a plan that would require potentially sacrificing everything she'd inherited to build something worthy of the daughter she was trying to raise. The phone on her father's desk seemed to mock her as morning light filled the room. One call to David would set everything in motion. One conversation would transform her from a successful CEO into a woman actively dismantling the criminal empire that had funded her entire life. Victoria reached for the phone, then hesitated. Once she made this call, there would be no going back to their comfortable life. Emma would grow up knowing their family fortune was built on blood money. But she would also grow up knowing that when confronted with inherited injustice, her mother had found the courage to choose accountability over comfort. Victoria picked up the phone and dialed David's number, preparing to begin the hardest business negotiation of her life, one where success would be measured not in profits, but in the possibility of redemption. This is it, the moment of truth that will determine whether this family can break free from their toxic legacy. David's voice was carefully controlled when he answered Victoria's call at 7 in the morning. "I found them," Victoria said without preamble. "All of my father's papers. Everything you said was true, and it's worse than you knew." The silence stretched long enough that Victoria wondered if the call had been dropped. "How much worse?" "He took out life insurance policies on your father. He profited from Robert's death, David. My father literally bet on your father dying from the stress." Victoria heard David's sharp intake of breath. "Jesus, I knew he was ruthless, but I never imagined. There's more. The money laundering wasn't just Thomas Westbrook covering gambling debts. My father was actively using criminal connections to finance Sterling Industries' growth. Victoria, I need you to think carefully about what you're telling me. Once we start down this path, there's no going back." Victoria looked at the evidence spread across her father's desk. Contracts, bank records, insurance policies that painted a picture of calculated evil disguised as business success. "I'm certain. And David, Emma knows. Not the details, but she knows that Grandpa made big mistakes that hurt people, and she knows we're going to try to fix them." How did she react? like it was the most obvious thing in the world. She asked if it would be hard, and when I said yes, she just accepted that doing the right thing is usually harder. 7 years old and already wiser than most adults. That's because of what you taught her. David, I need your help. Not just with Emma anymore, but with figuring out how to make this right. I do know where to begin. But Victoria, you need to understand what this will cost. We're talking about potentially facing criminal charges, losing your fortune, and destroying the Sterling Industries' reputation permanently. Victoria closed her eyes, thinking about Emma's trusting face when she'd promised to make Grandpa's mistakes right. I understand, but if I don't do this, what example am I setting for Emma? She's learned to be kind over the past few months, but those lessons won't stick if she grows up where adults protect their interests at any cost. Wade, there's someone you need to meet. Detective Sarah Martinez. She's been investigating cold cases related to organized crime money laundering from the 1990s. She helped me understand the full scope of what happened to my father. Victoria's stomach clenched. You've been working with law enforcement? For 2 years. Not specifically about Sterling Industries, but about the criminal network your father was connected to. That network is still active, still laundering money, still destroying businesses. Your evidence could help put dangerous people in prison. The magnitude hit Victoria like a physical blow. This wasn't just about making amends. This was about bringing down an active criminal organization. What would I need to do? Turn over all evidence to Detective Martinez, testify about what you found, and cooperate fully, even if it means implicating Sterling Industries in ongoing criminal activity. Victoria thought about Emma, asleep upstairs. If she agreed, Emma would grow up as the daughter of a whistleblower who had brought down her own family's empire. There would be media attention, social ostracism, financial ruin. But if she refused, Emma would grow up as heir to a criminal fortune, surrounded by the same toxic values that had made her cruel to Maria Rodriguez. When can I meet Detective Martinez? Today, if you're ready. But once you hand over that evidence, everything changes. Emma's life, your life, everyone who works for Sterling Industries, everything will be different, better or worse. Honest, maybe that's the same thing as better. Victoria made her decision with the same instinct that had guided her most successful business deals, except this time, success would be measured by her ability to sleep at night. Set up the meeting. And David, thank you for helping Emma become someone I can be proud of, for having the courage to tell me the truth, for giving me a chance to be better than the legacy I inherited. 4 hours later, Victoria sat across from Detective Sarah Martinez in a conference room at the community center, with David beside her and Emma in the children's area being supervised by Maria Rodriguez. The evidence from her father's study was spread across the table like a puzzle revealing decades of hidden crimes. This is extraordinary, Detective Martinez said, studying insurance policies that proved premeditated malice. Mrs. Sterling, do you understand this evidence could result in charges against Sterling Industries for racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy? I understand. What I don't understand is how to live with myself if I don't turn it over. You realize cooperating will probably destroy your company and personal fortune. Victoria looked through the window at Emma, who was reading a story to Marcus and other children. Detective Martinez, 3 months ago, my daughter was cruel and entitled, thinking she could abuse people because our family had money. Today, she's someone who wants to spend her free time helping children learn to read. That's remarkable. It happened because David taught her that real power comes from helping people, not hurting them. But if I don't follow through on that lesson myself, if I choose to protect my wealth instead of protecting the people my father harmed, then Emma will learn that values only apply when they're convenient. Victoria turned back to Detective Martinez. I want to cooperate fully. I want to testify against anyone who needs to be prosecuted. And I want Emma to grow up knowing that when her mother discovered her family was built on lies, she chose truth over comfort. As Detective Martinez collected the documents that would destroy the sterling fortune, Victoria felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood. The deep peace that comes from making a choice based on conscience rather than calculation. Through the window, she watched Emma finish her story and accept enthusiastic applause from her small audience. Her daughter looked genuinely happy, in a way that had nothing to do with expensive toys. She was happy because she was valued for her kindness and willingness to help others. 6 months later, Victoria stood in the much smaller kitchen of their modest apartment, making breakfast for Emma before school. The Sterling Industries scandal had made national headlines, resulting in criminal charges, seized assets, and complete dissolution of the company her father had built. But as Victoria watched Emma pack extra snacks to share with classmates who sometimes came to school hungry, she felt richer than she'd ever felt as a millionaire. "Mom," Emma said, "David called and said the community center got enough donations to build the new playground. Can we go see it after school?" "Of course," Victoria replied, buttoning her daughter's sturdy second-hand coat that Emma had chosen specifically because it had pockets big enough to carry books for children who couldn't afford their own. The transformation in both of them had been remarkable. Victoria now worked as a victim advocate, helping families navigate financial crimes. The pay was a fraction of what she'd earned as CEO, but the work felt meaningful in a way profit reports never had. Emma attended public school, quickly becoming known as the girl who helped struggling readers and shared her lunch with anyone who needed it. The entitled child who had tormented Maria Rodriguez was gone, replaced by someone who understood that true power came from lifting others up. "Mrs. Rodriguez is going to teach me how to make tamales this weekend," Emma announced as they walked to the bus stop. "She says cooking for people is another way to show you care." Victoria smiled, thinking about how far they'd all come. Maria now managed the community center's nutrition program, funded by restitution payments. David had been promoted to head counselor, using his own painful experiences to help other families heal from financial trauma. "Mom," Emma said as they waited for the bus, "do you ever miss being rich?" "I miss some things about having money. I miss being able to help people immediately when they need it. But Emma, I don't miss the person I was when we had all that money." "What kind of person were you?" Victoria thought about how to explain moral blindness to a 7-year-old who now instinctively noticed when others were struggling. "I was someone who thought being successful meant having more than other people, instead of someone who thought being successful meant helping other people have enough." Emma nodded solemnly. "David says real success is when you can look in the mirror and like the person looking back." As their bus arrived, Victoria reflected on the strange mathematics of their new life. They had lost millions of dollars, social status, and comfortable certainty. But they had gained something money couldn't buy, the knowledge that they were living according to their values, making the world slightly better rather than worse. Emma bounded up the bus steps, immediately moving to sit with a shy girl who'd been eating lunch alone. Victoria took the seat behind them, listening to her daughter's gentle questions and offers to share snacks. This was Emma's inheritance now, not a fortune built on suffering, but hard-won wisdom that real wealth came from relationships, compassion, and the courage to do right even when it was costly. As the bus pulled away, Victoria caught sight of their reflection in the window, a mother and daughter who had lost everything they thought they needed and discovered everything they actually needed. For the first time in her adult life, Victoria Sterling looked in the mirror and genuinely liked the person looking back. And judging by Emma's easy happiness and natural generosity, her daughter was learning to like herself for all the right reasons too. The Sterling family legacy would never be the same. But perhaps, Victoria thought as she watched Emma share her breakfast with her new friend, that was exactly the point.